Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek Early Production German Tiger 1. Since the last video update, a lot of progress has been made to the tank's front section over here, as well as a few of the other fittings and functions have been added. We'll be going over all these additions in this video. Moving on to the front hull detailing, that is comprised of all the components that you see here on the table. Oh, wait a minute. All these pieces here are still bagged. I'll take care of that. That's better. Anyway, here go the components that are supplied with the kit. These are all the up-to-date components that are supplied with the most current generation of Armortek Tiger 1s. Starting on this side here, we have that of the bow machine gun ball, and on this side here, we have that of the front driver's direct vision port equipment. Starting with the machine gun ball, it is comprised of two pieces. We have here the machine gun ball mount, and we actually have the ball itself. Now, the kit also supplies you with a CNC'd aluminum gun barrel for that of mimicking that of an basic MG34. However, that will not be utilized on this build here, as I'll be replacing it with a better detailed aftermarket one. More information on this is to follow. As for the piece itself, it is all CNC'd machined from aluminum and simply connects to each other like that, and this whole piece gets anchored to the tank's front hull with that of two fasteners, which will allow the machine gun ball to pivot freely. Moving from the ball now takes us to that of the visor. The visor components are very nicely done on these Armortek kits in that the visor is designed to be functional, in which it can open and close, just like the real tank. The armor pieces are all comprised of CNC'd aluminum. Now, this is very much evolved from the first generation Tiger 1, which I recently did a video on, in which, if anyone watches those videos, you'll see that these components here are comprised of white metal castings, and as Armortek advanced and modified the kit over the years, those castings were replaced with pieces comprised of CNC'd aluminum. The CNC aluminum parts are more accurate and are actually better compared to the older first generation units, and this can be seen once the piece is fully built. We have here the two side armor chunks, the actual visor itself with its correct geometry as well as its inlet detailing, the bottom portion of the armor, which has these two holes here, which are just drilled directly through for that of the mounting. More information on that is to follow. And also the front visor protector. And here's the front visor of the model, now fully modified and is about to go into its installation procedure. As for the visor components themselves, these are the stock original units, and the only mod that I made to them to get them to this part here has to do with that of the added cast texturing. It's important to point out that on the real Tiger 1 family, the front visor components are one of the few components that are found on the Tiger 1 that are comprised of cast metal components. And of them being cast metal, the castings on the German tanks are actually a lot more primitive and cruder compared to some of the other castings found on other nations' military vehicles, namely, of course, being that of the United States. The German castings were a lot more rougher in their overall appearance, and this type of texturing was translated into these parts that you see here on the table. As for the casting technique, it's my usual technique that I've used on all of my other builds, both 1/6, 1/16, and even 1/35, that are shown on the ECA channel in the past. Now, if you notice, the front guard portion here was totally left stock, and the reason for that is that I'm not going to be utilizing this piece whatsoever. On the real Tiger 1, on the top portion here, there's actually several slot screws, which is what's used to mount this component to that of the Tiger 1's front nose. Rather than utilizing the stock component, I'm going to be replacing it with one of my own resin components. As you can see, the difference between the resin one and the metal one is that the ECA one does have all of its detailing present, and these are absent on the stock piece. Now, theoretically, you can modify the kit one here to have the same specs of details, but rather than doing that, it's just a simple swap out component, and this is the one that's going to be utilized in its place. Now, of course, this is straight out of the mold, and it's going to be cleaned up a little bit just before the mounting procedure. Moving from the front direct vision port now takes us to the bow machine gun. The bow machine gun components on the Armortek kit are again comprised of these two CNC components here. Now, the front ball mount does have its overall basic shape and size. However, the front opening here is a lot different compared to what this geometry which is found on the real vehicle. Also, in addition to that, the material, again, is CNC'd, and on the real tank, this would be cast, which would have been machined on a large lathe. Now, it is possible to try to repair and alter this part here to bring it up to the next level. However, with the amount of work required to do that, I'm simply just going to replace this with one of my resin components that I have here. This machine gun ball detailing here is another EastCoastArmory.com component, and is going to be modified to mate onto the Armortek tank. Now, this is a procedure that I've done on another Armortek build in the past, and there's more detail about that in the other video. However, it's going to be receiving this similar types of modifications. The difference, of course, being on the original Tiger 1 from Armortek, this was cast, and they swapped it out to CNC tooling. However, I believe the dimensions of the components are still exactly the same. Now, I am going to be keeping the Armortek machine gun ball itself, as this is perfectly fine and actually fits with the ECA one absolutely perfectly. Now, to modify the ECA piece to fit onto the Armortek kit, you'll notice that the Armortek unit descends deeper compared to the ECA one. In order to modify the ECA one, I have this adapter ring here, which I'm going to mount to the resin casting. I'm going to fill this material in with some epoxy, making it one solid component. Once this is done, you'll have the exact same specs as the Armortek piece, which will then be a direct drop-in installation to the Armortek hull. Now, of course, I'll also be making the machine gun ball pivoting with an animation, which is something I also do on my builds, and more information on this is to come. Another bit of detailing that's going to be added to the tank has to do with that of the front spare track rack. Now, this is interesting, as this is the first time that a spare track rack has been offered on an Armortek Tiger 1 kit. All of the previous renditions of the Tiger 1 kit did not have any provisions whatsoever for mounting on a spare track, and this would be something that would be dependent on the builder to go ahead and fabricate himself. For the Tiger 131 kit, Armortek went ahead and supplied the components that you see here. Now, the Tiger 1 spare track rack, just like with a few of the other features on this vehicle, did go through several iterations throughout the Tiger 1's production run. The version that we have here is the more common version, and seems to be the one that was settled upon from North Africa onward. This version of the track rack is very simple, and it's comprised of two pieces. We have here the main bar itself, as well as a small little footrest in order to help a crew member climb up onto the front of the vehicle. Now, as for the kit components, they are, again, very simple and supplied as follows. We have here a CNC'd aluminum bracket for that of the rack itself, and again, as for the footrest, it is a pre-bent laser cut piece of steel. Now, as for the construction, it is all that with fasteners, and what's very interesting is that in order to mount the footrest to the bracket, the section here is actually drilled and tapped from the kit, so no external fasteners are going to be needed, which of course is handy since you have to have the track slide into this section here, and you don't want any appendages for the track to snag upon. As for the two main holes themselves, these fasten to pre-threaded holes that are found on the front armor plate of the Tiger 1, and everything again simply bolts together. And here's the front visor block, now fully completed and mounted to the model. Now, one quirk to point out on these front visors is that on all of the Tiger 1 kits that have been produced since the company's founding, all the way up to their latest rendition, the visors can be built in a open or closed state. This has to do with the way the kit is designed. Now, if you build the kit purely out of the box, when it comes time for the visor is going to stay in its closed state like I have it here. This has to do with the way the kit parts are designed. There's no mechanical device that inhibits this piece from falling down. Because of the mass and the weight of the visor block, if you build it out of the box, gravity is going to pull the piece down and it will stay like the way we see it here. Now, the way I was able to keep it in its open state has to do with a small little modification that I made, which is that of two little springs, which are added on the two corners here of the block. These springs are very hard to see, but work very well when it comes time for the finished unit that we have here. With the springs in place, the visor is in its open state and can be closed manually. Moving from the visor to the front visor vision protector block, this is the recent EastCoastArmory.com piece that was showcased earlier. Now, as for the installation, on the kit original, there would have been two fasteners which would have mounted this block into place via under the plate. However, rather than using that method, to mount the resin piece on, I simply drilled a single hole in the center here of the resin block and a corresponding hole into the tank's plate. With the use of adhesives, everything was then mounted firmly in the way you see it here. Now, in addition to mounting on the block, one other modification that I made to the front plate has to do with these two little scallops that we have here on either end of the vision block protector. These scallops are present on the real Tiger one and are a bit of detailing that should be present. These are absent on the Armortek kit, but it's also important to point out that they are absent on just about every other 1/6 scale model and 1/16 model for that matter on the market. As for adding these scallops, this was done with a Dremel, and I simply marked the locations that needed to be added, and the scallops were then carved in place. I did have due to the adding of this procedure, I did have a little nick on these two sections here of the vision block, which of course, in this light you can see, and I'm going to add some more body filler to blend it all in. But more information on that is, of course, to come. Moving from the top sliding block takes us to these two sculpted blobs of epoxy that we have here. The purpose of these blobs are to simulate the welded over direct vision slots which would have been found on this section here of the hull. When the Tiger 1 was first developed, in addition to the main direct vision block, there were also two small backup direct vision ports which were located in these two sections. Shortly after the initial production run, it was deemed that these two sections here were weak points in the tank's armor and were really redundant and not necessary. These tanks that were equipped with these vision slits were deleted, and what was done at a factory, they took a plug of steel, added into these holes, and then just welded over it. That is mimicked by these sculpted sections here. These are just two sections of sculptable epoxy, the same material that I use for my welds, and I simply added the etchings to simulate that of the weld lines. It's also interesting to point out that vehicles after the early production run had these two vision slots here totally omitted on the steel plate, and it's not uncommon to see vehicles from the mid to the late production runs without any sort of remnants of the direct vision slots that we have here. It's also important to point out that these welds on the real tanks were actually quite sloppy in appearance and were very coarse and rough. Moving from the bow vision block now takes us to the bow machine gun ball. This is the same unit that of course was mentioned in a earlier portion of the video, and here you can see it totally completed. As for the ball itself, you'll notice that there are no weld marks that have been sculpted around this section here. This is as per the real vehicle, as these were not externally welded to the front plate. On either side we have two little wing nuts that are hinged. The purpose for these two locations here have to do for the snorkel armored cover cap, which for the tank to be waterproof would be fastened to this section here, and the wing nuts here would keep everything firmly in place. It would also be intended for that of a canvas tarpaulin, which would protect the barrel of the MG34T from moisture as well as the elements. These components here are not included with the Armortek kit, and these ones that are used are the resin versions from EastCoastArmory.com. Moving from the machine gun now takes us to the remainder of the front hull detailing, starting with that of course, the sculpted welds. All the sculpted weld beads have been added to their appropriate locations. In addition to the welds, you'll see here that the fender hinge locations have been mounted. Now, these are slightly different from the earlier pattern of Armortek Tiger 1, in that if we recall from the last Tiger 1 video I've done, on the early Tiger 1 there was this large milled slot in this location here, and the hinge, which was one single piece of cast metal, would be bolted to this area here, filling in that gap. Since those kits were developed, Armortek changed the way the kits were designed, and now the hinges are individual pieces which get mounted in little recesses that are integrally machined into the plate. With this method, this does clean up the amount of bodywork required, and you don't need to polish away any seams that would have been located in these sections here. Sculpted weld beads, of course, have been added, as these are found on the real vehicle, and these pieces are mounted stock with that of fasteners which thread directly into these pieces from the bottom portion of the plate. In addition to the hinges, you'll notice that the front bosses have also been mounted on. For many people who are unaware of these locations, on the real Tiger 1, in order to help lift the heavy sprocket off of the final drive, because of the weight, a small little crane and hoist system was developed in which you would slide up the crane hoist into this little portion here on the upper front plate, and this would allow you then to hook up cables and hooks to the sprocket, which allowed the removal of such a heavy piece. On the original initial production Tigers, this little reinforcement brace wasn't present, and it was just a simple hole directly into the armor plate. Quickly, it was deemed that this was not sufficient and was actually a weak point with this design, and was upgraded to the way you see it here, where they took a steel pipe and welded it directly to the top deck, thus giving it more brace and more support. This design here stayed with the Tiger 1 all the way up to the end of its production life. As for these pieces here, they were originally supplied with the Armortek kit. However, the pieces were basically exactly identical to the ones found on the early first batch production of Armortek Tiger 1s, which, if memory serves, was a simple steel plug which would have been mounted in and was not drilled out through and through. Instead of trying to modify that component, it was easier simply to omit it altogether, and in place I utilized that of a small PVC tube which was cut and machined to the proper specs and then mounted in place. One thing important to point out, that you cannot simply just have a small little tube segment sticking up. Because of the front angle here, the tube will go with this angle. On the real Tiger 1, this little boss here was actually straight and totally level, and to do this you have to make a small cut to the PVC, giving it the correct angle so that all the measurements line up. This was done to both of the units found on this model. After the components were added, sculpted weld beads were mounted to complete the look. In addition to the welds added to the brace, the remainder of the welds which were needed for the front hull have also been completed. If you'll notice here on these front section of welds, it's not just a simple oval, in that on the real Tiger 1, this was actually 3 components. You would have had a plate here, which would have been that of the side hull paneling, and then you had 2 little half-moon spacers, which would have been added to these 2 locations here, and then everything would have been welded in the way you see it on this model. This is true for all Tiger 1s, from the initial all the way up to its final production batch. Another bit of detailing that was added were the tool posts here for that of the front large shovel, which is a standard bitted kit on these Tiger 1s. As for the clamps, these are not the kit originals. The kit original does give you some basic clamp detailing. However, in their place, I utilized my standard metal clamps that I have here. These are fully functional and are the same ones that have been used on several of the builds that have been showcased on the ECA channel in the past. Now, if you notice, this one here is flush with the deck. However, this one here is elevated. This is as per the real Tiger 1, and if memory serves, if we can recall, the shovel on the Tiger 1 has this very long handle and has this nice bend to it, which appears in this location over here. Because it is bent, you have to compensate by having the front tool post with an elevated bracket. As for the pieces, they are all soldered together, and in addition to being soldered, they are attached to the tank via pins. There's a steel pin which is soldered to the bottom portions of this one here in the center and these 2 here on the feet. And then, once mounted to the tank, sculpted weld beads are then added to complete the look. Of course, this exact same procedure was done in the past and will be done to the remainder of the tool post, which will be added to the top deck as the build progresses. Moving from the welds now takes us to the front track rack that was showcased earlier in the video. What was done on this component here was that the front footrest has been mounted to the tank via two small fasteners, which was mentioned before, and the bodywork here you can see has been totally completed and totally flush. There is no remnants whatsoever that there are fasteners in these two locations here. And it gives the illusion with these sculpted weld beads that these weld beads are what's keeping this bracket to the front track rack. In addition to this detailing here, the way the rack is mounted to the tank is with two long fasteners. Now, this was slightly changed from the kit design. The way the kit was designed was that you had two countersunk fasteners that would have been located on these two edges, and then they would be mounted directly into tapped holes, which are found in the front plate. Rather than utilizing the kit-supplied countersunks, I went ahead and bored the hole deeper into the aluminum and used a standard cap screw. The purpose for this has to do with the cap screw gives you better surface to add that of the bodywork and blend everything in compared to having to deal and contend with that of a countersunk fastener. This is definitely doable because the way the Armortek kit is designed, you do have sufficient material on these two sections over here of the bracket, which allows you to bore them out with a drill press in order to hide that of a cap screw on the inside. After the component was mounted on, of course, Loctite was definitely used. The cap screw divots here were plugged up with that of bodywork and then sanded, and it leaves for a nice smooth flush finish, just like with the rest of the tank's fasteners that are on the upper hull. Once fully painted, absolutely no trace of these locations are going to be remaining, and it's going to look like that the sculpted weld beads that we have here are what's securing this unit to the vehicle. As for the kit piece in general, it was a very good quality and went together really without any hitches, besides the modifications that I chose to have made to this piece. However, the holes did line up perfectly, and the fasteners simply threaded in, as one would expect. Moving down from the spare track rack now takes us to the bottom fasteners. Now, this was something that was mentioned in a much earlier update video for this build, however, has been completed at this point here. As a quick recap on the Real Tiger 1, there is a rigidity plate that is found on and welded to this front section here of the hull, and the purpose of this is that this rigidity plate is what's needed to give extra support, as these fasteners here are the mounting fasteners for that of the final drive. Now, long story short, on the Armortek kit, this plate is supplied, however, the holes are designed in which so that you can have the kit supplied cap screws, which are for mounting onto the plate. However, on the Real Tiger 1, this would have been in reverse, and you would have had threaded sections protruding and the nuts, which would have been seen in these sections here, which is what holds the unit in place. Some modifications were made to the plate, and now the detail units have been added. These fasteners here are just for detail purposes only and do not serve any actual fitting of the parts. As you can see, these were modified from M3 by 6mm fasteners. They were shortened somewhat and simply just epoxy to these sections here on the plate. It's a mirror image on the opposite side, however, once added, completes the look of the front portion here of the model. Moving up from the track rack now takes us to this location here, which unfortunately I wasn't able to add the last bit of detailing to. On the Real Tiger 1, there would have been a small little grab handle in this location over here. The purpose of this grab handle has to do with this version here of the front track rack. Because this has that integral foot loop, there would have been a small little grab handle, which would have been welded to this section here of the hull to help the crew member climb and mount onto the front portion of the vehicle. Now, if you notice, there are two little holes that are integrally milled into the top plate on this kit here. However, the Armortek piece was just a simple piece of bent aluminum. It's very basic in shape. However, the real unit would have been a little bit more to it in detail, and regrettably, I ran out of the size of brass required in order to fabricate the remainder of the detailing. This, of course, will be added by the next video update, so you might want to stay tuned for that. Moving towards the sides of the model, you can see that a lot of progress has been made to the actual panels themselves. Since the last videos, I went ahead and completed the bodywork for the fasteners, which were located on these plates over here. As for the bodywork, this is done in my usual format with the use of fillers, and then everything gets sanded down. Now, if anyone is wondering how exactly to do this, there are tons of videos on YouTube which go over doing bodywork. It's basically the same procedure that I use on these models here. With the fastener locations deleted on both sides of the tank, it's now time to add on that of the fender mounting bosses that are found on the sides of the Tiger 1. Now, on the Armortek kits that were manufactured post 2006, I want to say, these locations over here are in the format that we have here on this model, which are, we have very large holes, which are integrally drilled into the plates supplied by Armortek, and also supplied by Armortek are the CNC steel threaded bosses that we have here. Now, on the Tiger 1, one distinguishing factor for these vehicles is that on the sides of the hull, there were these mounting locations which would have been welded on the real tank. These locations look like small little blocks of steel, and these are tapped and threaded and are the provisions that the side skirts actually physically bolt to. The way these are done on the Armortek tank are very reminiscent to the actual units, in that we have these blocks here which are pre-tapped and threaded, and the fasteners which hold on the actual side skirts simply just thread onto these locations, thus securing them to the tank. This is a very nice detail element in that it helps with the mounting of the side skirts in a realistic way, but also in case you want to build a tank with a couple of side skirts removed, you have the details underneath. Now, it's interesting to point out that these provisions weren't always supplied with the Armortek kits. For, I believe, the first 2 or 3 Armortek kit releases of the Tiger 1, these provisions were not in existence. The way the kits were designed back then was that you still had these holes that were pre-drilled into the plate, but they were slightly smaller. They were about 1/8 of an inch, which is the size in which a M3 fastener can slide through without it grabbing onto the metal itself. These side skirts would then mounted to the tank via a fastener, and then you would have to hold on to a nut on the inside and tighten everything together. This system did work, however, did have some problems to it. First problem is that when building up the tank, once the tank gets sealed up on the top, trying to get access to the inside portion here to hold on to the fasteners definitely becomes an ordeal. Another drawback has to do with the actual geometry of the side skirts themselves. Now, here I have, in the sealed bubble wrap over here, the side skirts that come with the tank. Now, even though these side skirts are the ones that came with this version of the Tiger 1 from Armortek, the original kits utilize the exact same side skirts. In fact, this design here has not changed since their first production release. Now, and there's good reason for that, in that these fenders here, or these side skirts panels here, are actually really, really good. Now, if you notice, right here, you'll see there's this lip that goes across the top portion here of the side skirt. This is present on the real Tiger 1 kit. Or I should say, it's present on the real Tiger 1 counterpart. When it comes time to mounting these on, you'll see that this lip is going to cause some problems with mounting of the side skirt. These side skirt panels here are designed so that they fit on those blocks and it suspends them in the correct manner. Now, like I said, those blocks are not present with the original Armortek kit, and this was something that was a requirement of the builder to do at the time. In fact, I remember fabricating these pieces out of bits of square plastic tubing. However, since those runs, Armortek redesigned the kit to supply you with these really awesome boss components over here. So much so that if anyone, the reason why I'm going through all this spiel is that if anyone does have one of the original 2003 or 2002 releases of the Tiger 1 and they do not include these pieces here, simply contact Armortek and see if you can acquire this little parts bag. These components here can be dropped into an older Armortek kit by simply just drilling out the kit supplied holes so that they allow these new pieces. This is definitely something that you will thank me for if you ever encountered this step on your old rendition Tiger 1. With the bag opened up, you can see the pieces. They are all CNC'd, machined from steel, have their threadings pre-mounted on, and these simply drop directly into these holes that we have here. They're simply mounted on with that of adhesives, and once installed, it's not something you have to worry about. And here are the bosses now being fitted to the hull. Here I have half of them mounted on, and the installation is going on without a hitch. These go on in a very quick and simple manner. However, there is one little technique I want to show anyone watching this in case they encounter this procedure on their build. This will make the installation go a lot more smoother. Now, like I said, the pieces simply just get mounted on. However, one thing that has to be exhibited by the builder is that the consistency of the angle that we see on these blocks here. They all have to be identical to each other, which of course is going to come to play when it comes time for mounting on the side skirt panels. Now, to keep them all in line, I'm going to show how to do that with this row that we have here. When it comes time for mounting on these pieces, you don't want to install all of them and then try to line them up with everything mounted on. In my opinion, the best way to do it is do it panel per panel, and you just eke through them all until completion. It doesn't add too much extra time, but it's definitely one that ensures consistency throughout these pieces. With some bosses in hand, I'm going to start the installation. To do that, I'm going to take my ball of glue, put a little smear around the circumference here of these holes. Once the glue is fitted, the bosses simply just get slid into place. You could pivot them around a little bit just so that you ensure the adhesive goes around the entirety of the sleeve. Once the pieces are slipped on, you can adjust them slightly with your fingers or with a plier if need be. However, to make sure that they are nice and organized or nice and consistent with one of the side skirt panels, I will simply line it up and press onto the pieces. If any of them stick, you could then go ahead and twist them until you have the pieces lining up accordingly. And once completed, you can see all of the bosses lined up in a nice, consistent, and straight manner. With these out of the way, I'm now going to do the exact same procedure to the opposite side. Once the bosses are completed, well, it's then time to work on that of the side skirt panels, as well as on this side here, that for the transport track removal cable, which of course will be discussed in the next video update. So more information on that is to come. And here are the bosses now secured to the opposite side of the model. Now, one final thing I'm going to mention is that the kit only supplies you with a finite amount of these pieces, and they give you only as much as you need. What I mean by that is that you don't have any spares that are supplied with the kit, so that when it comes time for installation, do not lose any of these parts and definitely keep them in a nice orderly location that is close to hand. As if one of them were to drop during the install and hit the floor and bounce around, you're going to be having to tear apart your floor trying to track down this missing piece, as you're not going to have to rely on any spare ones supplied with the kit. However, like I said before, once these are installed, it's a one and done thing, and you can then progress to the remainder of the build once fitted. Moving towards the inside here, you can see the work that was done to the interior portions here. Over here we have a bit of Lexan plastic that has been bolted directly to the kit supplied holes, which are used to hold the front visor in place. The purpose of this Lexan here is to simulate the Panzer glass which would have been found on the real Tiger 1. If we could all recall the movie Saving Private Ryan, Tom Hanks runs up to the Tiger 1, sticks his Thompson in the front visor, and sprays the inside of the vehicle. On a real Tiger 1, that is not going to be the case, as there is about 5 inches thick of Panzer glass, which is definitely bulletproof, specifically from 45 ACP. So that is definitely something that is cringeworthy in one of those movies. The plastic was mounted in this section over here, and again using the same fastener mounting holes, which are used to mount on the front equipment. Now, because of this modification, the stock fasteners are not going to be suitable due to the extra width now required to compensate for that of the 1/8-inch thick piece of plastic, as well as the aluminum for the front armor plate. Of course, tracking down metric size fasteners is not very difficult, so you just opt for the longer units and mount them directly in place of the kit ones. Moving from the front visor takes us back to the bow MG. Now here you can see the pivoting function now that it's fully completed. In order to do the pivoting function, here I have a standard Futaba servo, which is mounted directly to the front armor plate with that of these 2 brass straps. The straps are fitted to the plate via fasteners and is a permanent mounting. This isn't like several other builders that I've seen on the internet which utilize something like servo tape or even a type of glues or adhesives for this procedure. With the fasteners, it's threaded directly into the armor and it is not going anywhere, which is definitely something you want, as you don't want this servo working loose on you, specifically during operation. It's fitted with that of a homemade transfer bar that connects to that of the bow MG pivoting system. For the pivoting system, it's the design that I've used on several other builds in the past. This is a lateral motion type system, and here we have a piece of brass that has been bent and mounted to the fastener securing holes, which are that of the bow MG. Similar in manner to that of the plexiglass, which was mentioned before. With the camera off the tripod, you can get a better idea on how the system functions. Here I have the brass strap, and the brass strap here has a small slot that is cut directly into its center. On the machine gun ball itself, there is a threaded shaft or a fastener that is emerging from the center here. The fastener has a flat piece of brass that is soldered to it, and that piece of brass slides into this finely cut slit and connects to the servo. What these two systems do is that because of the thinness of the cut on this slot here and the flatness of this plate, this will prevent the ball from rotating when pulled by the servo. When it comes time to designing a pivoting system, the pivoting of the ball is something that can happen. Because of the pull of the servo, in a lot of locations, the ball will want to cant as opposed to pivot. By doing with this system here, this forces the force of the pull of the servo in a lateral motion rather than a rotational one. Because of this, the ball will pivot left and right, and the rotation will be non-existent. Now, another bit of the design that's important is that of this extension spring that we have here. The purpose of this spring is that this forces the spring forces the ball forward, which means it is always cupping up against the front portion here of the machine gun ball. It can be moved back in case anything hits it. However, the spring will always give a constant bit of force in the forward direction. Now the tank is on, and I'm going to pivot the servo via the radio so you get to see it in action. And on the external portion of the model, if light permits, as you can see, the ball wants to move in a lateral motion instead of a rotational one, which is exactly what you're looking for when it comes for these machine gun ball pivoting functions. As you can see on the interior here, I'm still in the process of completing the wiring and shutoff switch features, which will be located in these sections over here. More information on that is going to come in the next video update, along with the remainder of the tank's tin work. Again, more information is to follow. However, with that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale, radio-controlled, early production Armortek Tiger 1. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this particular build that have been posted since project start, as well as the other 1/6 and smaller scale builds that are found on the ECA channel. In addition to that, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale detail components. Thanks for watching.